So for the more astute among you, you probably realize at this point that this isn't your average political organization. Uh, this is, in fact, a cultural renaissance movement that is fighting for the only sane policies right now in the world that will offer a chance for the future development of human society in opposition to a general economic collapse. There's a lot that goes with that. To simply say you're a cultural organization doesn't just mean that you talk about art, you talk about science, you talk about these nice things that are cultural, but there's a real intention that goes with that that is serious, because we're talking about willfully transforming the culture in which people exist, are cultivated, grow, and develop, and perpetuate their society. And now that's something which I guess it used to be a little bit more understood that was possible, that individuals could intervene and perform a contribution to the culture as a whole that they're a part of, that lives on after they die, with a better effect than what they came into after they leave the world. There was an idea that individuals could do that, and that was today. This is a kind of lost concept. It's sort of this idea that culture itself is it's kind of like the fashion, you know? Like what was cool in the 1970s is different from what's cool in the 80s, it's different what's cool today, and it changes kind of like the wind. It's sort of an organic blob that just sort of happens. And it's never quite the same, but it just sort of changes. Our class today is going to be on this question here that I've been letting roll around in my mind for a while, which is what does the harmonic mean? And you could take that in three ways, three possible takes on the sentence itself. One of which is not true. To be mean in a harmonic way is paradoxical; it can't occur. But the other two possibilities they can work. And hopefully, in the course of this discussion, of this little presentation, we're going to have a better sense of what the political implications are of science, art, as it pertains to the future development of mankind. And also, hopefully, a little something about ourselves, too, and what is it that we're actually recognizing when we really engage ourselves in a question and that we go to resolve it on our own volition. So, I think anybody here is here because they observe that there's a lot of, I think the only word you can really come across would be discord in the world right now. There's a lot of not just discordant actions, events, Africa, what we just saw in Pascal's briefing, pretty disgusting things happening all over the world that are manifesting as actions and events, but also for those who probe a little bit more deeply than simply looking on the surface of the events, discordant thoughts, very, very discordant ideas that are generating and governing these processes. And you could ask yourself, is it just a sad accident that Africa is in the situation that it's in right now? Well-meaning intentions that just went running amok? Or is it just an accident that you've got a healthcare policy that's being pushed through on the basis of cutting massive cuts in medicine and healthcare expenses that are going to accidentally, who knew they were going to have the effect of ending the lives of a lot of aging baby boomers who are excess overhead drag on the society in terms of cost? Is that just accidental and really maybe the intention was good, just fucked up, globalization, we really tried? And indeed, that's not the case. And it takes a little bit of courage sometimes to look at the darkness of this matter, because what you are dealing with is an intention that is consistent. It is logically consistent in its ideology. It is an imperial intention that goes back many, 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 I wouldn't say decades or generations, but you could say epochs. And the quality that this political structure, that the idea that requires a certain type of fascist or dictatorial political structure has, is that it's always been deathly afraid of the acknowledgement that human beings can come to know ideas and judge the value of certain ideas as being superior than other ideas. And that's the fight today. It's, can we actually place a value on an idea? Which is, I guess Pascal didn't get a chance to bring it up, but there was a committee hearing in the United States just this week that featured Alan Greenspan on the economic collapse. And in it, Greenspan was on the defensive because, you know, he's the guy that created derivatives, the whole speculative, the idea of creative financial instruments. This shit didn't exist before 1987 when this guy came in and said, let's make new ways of making money without actually doing anything. Okay. So these things have ballooned to such obscene proportions that they are now taking down the global economy. Most of the money that's registered is collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, all sorts of things that have names which, if you look beyond the name, are completely unpayable speculative debts. They don't exist. So Greenspan was on the defensive, and when he was asked, why did you ban regulating derivatives in the 90s when you had the chance, 10 years earlier? And he said, well, because derivatives are just they're ideas. You can't regulate ideas. It's innovation because, yeah, we used to have a society that produced things, that had investments into infrastructure, and banks made loans to businesses that produce things. And that was then, but now we have an idea-based society. We make ideas. Where infrastructure comes from and lights and refrigeration and the shit we buy at our dollar stores, don't think about that stuff. We make ideas. And so the insanity here is that, what's he saying? But you can't really know, how do you put a regulation, a measure, on something which is immaterial? Because you can't see or feel or taste or touch an idea. So how do you regulate something like that, right? You can't put a dollar value next to it. And so that was his defense for why he basically is pushing for an Alice in Wonderland economy. Because all ideas are created equal, right? It's just how you sell your idea that really, how well can you lie that gives you the best car salesman of the year award, So there's this real lack of an understanding that ideas do have an efficient existence within the universe. And the fact that the nature of ideas themselves, as they can be explored in terms of how we generate them, how they affect us, is that they tend to exist as wholes. You tend to have things from a baby, for example, that's coming to know the world, has just colors, sounds, just these different incoherent sensory stimulation coming in from the five senses. And it develops concepts of mom, car. It develops these ideas. But it's not simply by the simple, you could say the geometrical placing of the features of the mother, or the particular sounds of her voice, necessarily just those tonal sounds that register in the baby's and in the child's mind the identity of mother. Because if there was a twin, if the mother was an identical twin, generally speaking, after a few minutes or under a due amount of time, it would be able to convince the children that identical twin is the mother. It's the same thing for parents too. They can tend to identify when they're children, if they have twins, which one is which. There's a certain personality that goes with each identity. That's something beyond simply the senses, even though it can be very similar. And so these are ideas of wholes that occur. It's not simply by adding up the parts that you kind of have the idea of the whole, but you have the whole, and then there's parts that go along with it, right, to come out with an idea. And infrastructure is another one, right? We create infrastructure, a bridge or a sanitation system, as an idea, as a whole, and that idea is what's going to govern how we assemble the parts, how we organize to make this occur, make a planning policy for a space program. It comes out as a whole idea. And now what you have in a society which is on its way towards what LaRouche calls thermodynamic equilibrium or entropy or heat death, is a society that increasingly detaches, or what these societies tend to share in common as they're on their way down, where they tend to increasingly consume more energy than they create, is is a compartmentalization of the whole, where the different parts tend to start increasingly acting against the interests of the whole. Right? Because every time you have a whole, you have a unique idea, and there's parts to the idea. But as the idea of harmony is concerned, like the origin of the word harmony simply means to work together, to be in concordance. And when increasingly the parts don't do that, don't fulfill its purpose, its function successfully, bridges collapse, engines explode. See it all around you, right? There's civil war, right? The different parts of the interest in your society tend to create more and more tension at the point that you have eruptions within a society. The effect also, if you look at, for example, the institutions that exist within every society through education, the justice systems, the healthcare systems, who have the distinct quality and purpose of making better people in various ways, right? Through mind, body, or soul. You have these institutions that exist because developing citizens who are educated are better than uneducated. Their chances in survival are best assured, and the society best perpetuates its continuity by having successful educational programs, by keeping the body fit, giving people access, not just the nobility, but everybody, to medicine, treatment. Again, it's better to have a bunch of healthy people than a society full of sick people that are dying a lot. It's kind of self-evident. And a justice system as well. The purpose for a correctional system is to produce people who have become rehabilitated. That's generally the reason why we have laws that we formed around the idea of justice, to appeal to something which isn't quite the mind either, but it isn't quite the body either, but it yet still makes, or its design is to make better people when it functions. And when they don't function, they tend to produce worse people, which one can argue is exactly what's happening to pretty much all three of those things in our current stage of society right now. And so I would say that this is largely a cause of this quality of compartmentalization, of trying to break a whole down into parts and losing sight of what the purpose and existence is of the whole, which I think comes out most clearly in school, which is at the heart of what generates everybody in your society, right? So the education system is definitely one of the most solid reflections of this. And I personally, just speaking from experience, I was always told, going back to elementary school, that I'm an artist. I'm a right-brained. I was right-brained, and so for me, it was very self-evident that mathematics, science, physics, chemistry, that's might be interesting in its own way, but not for me. So, getting a 60, getting shitty marks, it was okay because I was right-brained, and that was what I was supposed to do. And then, increasingly, I realized that as I got into university, all of the students who were art students, music students, tended to all conglomerate within their own localized cultures. And then all of the computer science students, left-brain students, so to speak, all sort of associated with their people. And then nobody actually really ended up integrating in any way. You kind of had passing friends, but there's sort of two distinct cultures that were relatively incompatible. And you get that through most of the universities today when you walk through. It's a real schism. And so you tend to have an effect where, in that sense, as soon as you create this division between art and science, the science becomes seen as something more utilitarian. You do it to have just a use of something. Not really making discoveries, because what's the use of making a discovery of a principle or something like that? I mean, it doesn't have an immediate application in anything. Not a lot of profit in doing something like that. So you tend to get innovation. Things change technologically, better iPods, things of that sort that you can market immediately. Better video games, stuff of that sort. Things that generally brainwash the population. And in art, it becomes pure pleasure, which is the other standard, right? You either have functionally you have utility or pleasure, which is going to be your standard of what you're going to accomplish. And art simply becomes, well, are we concerned as artists and enjoyers of art? Are we concerned very much about ennobling the population with the music, with the entertainment, with the theater that we promote, that we encourage? Or is it more about giving people an emotional roller coaster ride of some sort? That tends to be the purpose of that field. And for me, what disgusted me, and eventually I sort of rejected, in a certain sense, when I was in university, the general philosophy, which was the purpose of art at that time, was to be as incoherent in fine arts. That's what you get. It's to make the purpose of a great art piece was to make people squirm in their seats, and that was what the pretty much all the professors had the same philosophical outlook, that's what made great art. And to the degree that it was comprehensible, or you were trying to communicate some coherent concept, you would actually lose marks. And so I found myself at a certain point actually deconstructing my own world to be less coherent in order to get better grades. And at a certain point I had to put the brakes on and realize, like, I'm actually doing something really damaging to myself in the long run here. And I had to sort of figure out a new perspective to see the whole problem. But I don't think I'm alone in that. I've since organized, I've been organizing now for about 3 years, and that's something that I've come across all across the population. Ottawa, Montreal, Boston, California. It's generally something that comes up in the culture all around. And so I thought with that, what I'm going to do today will be to set the tone by looking at a little bit of the historical context in this political battle of developing a harmonic balance between extremes, which centers around the fights within Greece, Plato's Academy, through Kepler, the Renaissance, and today. And what I'm going to be focusing on shall primarily be a famous work by Plato, which is called the Republic, specifically books 6 and 10, and the beginning of books 3 of Kepler's Harmonies of the Worlds, the book that was the foundation of all modern science, and that basically gave you a little thing you might have heard about now called gravity. So, to set sort of, I guess, the tone of this class, before we do anything else, I figured what I would do would be to give people a certain musical offering as a taste of what it is that this movement is really doing, not just theoretically but practically, in exploring this whole question of what is the unification of arts and science, and how do you deploy that to inspire a population. So I think with that, and without further ado, I'll call up a couple of my cohorts to produce something. Now, we didn't warm up today, but I think it should still be fine.
Spiritus,
That was Latin. It was by Felix Mendelssohn. Yeah, don't feel bad for not understanding it. It meant, simply put, it was by Felix Mendelssohn. It meant, the words were, "Blessed are the dead, who henceforth die in the Lord, thus says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them." So, yeah, thanks. So, that was Felix Mendelssohn. Yeah.
Do you feel harmonically aligned?
Let's try it. That's good. So, one of the reasons why we'd study Plato was because, well, here's the thing: you get when you're talking to people in the street and you're trying to communicate some of these policies, global development, bankruptcy organization, and you can go through the details with a vision, an idea of a really long-term vision, something tangible. The general reaction you get as an organizer is, "Oh, that's utopic. That's not the way the world works." No. And it's not surprising, because we have a lot of ugliness in the world. The more you look, actually, the more ugly it tends to look. Especially when you start thinking about the future and you enter that into your variable about how you see the world. And so, when your only internal standard of experience of what you had for the culture that you were born into, the art that you've experienced, the political decisions, what is a politician, what is the purpose of economics, has been corrupt as hell and ugly, and that's your standard, then when you actually see something which, and you could explain to people, it's been done before. Roosevelt did it. It's JFK. It's just, look at their policies. It's not impossible. It's not incompatible with human beings. It's rather incomprehensible to them, because what JFK, what Roosevelt, what Lincoln were actually doing was something true. It was something just and rational, and it works really well when it's applied. And so when your only standard for trying to figure out what justice is injustice and ugliness, and what beauty is the same thing. It's like you're in a cave and you're just trying to figure out what what shadows are, and what the sun is supposed to be like if all you've ever experienced was a flame, and what reality is if that's all you've ever known. And it's a hard concept. So I think what I'd like to do would be to read a couple of pages from Book 6 of Plato, where he's been in a discussion with Glaucon and Adamantos, regarding the resolution to this recurring problem, historically even in Plato's time, which was this falling upon extremes of going to a complete oligarchic society of dictatorial control, right, total utilitarian, to the opposite extreme, which was what Athens was just in under Pericles, which was the political environment Plato was coming into, which was a democracy, which was just give pleasure. How do you, as an orator, as a political leader, induce people into a state of euphoria rather than actually say anything? And this sort of flip-flopping of systems was a cyclical problem that was very, very understood by the intelligentsia of ancient Greek society, led by Plato and Socrates, which was, and there's gradients in between, obviously, but these are like the extremes. But how do you actually get beyond this cyclical, perpetual suicide, Dark Age, Renaissance type of, phenomenon? So he's had this discussion. They've gotten to the point now what they're discussing is the philosopher king and how it is that one can give new meaning back to this disgraced word of philosopher, which at that time nobody really respected. Because, what is a philosopher in their society? It's somebody who can manipulate reasons, manipulate arguments, and just talk on kind of for infinity, it's kind of like a never-ending game, So, and this comes from the sophists, the people who profess to have wisdom, whereas a philosopher, as Socrates was trying to give it new meaning, or give it back its true meaning, was the lover of wisdom, philo, Sophia. And really, what does that mean to love wisdom, and not really accepting no substitutes? So, I think that'll be a good introduction to it. And also thinking about the discussions that we tend to come across, both in the political leadership as well as in the population, regarding people who are just demoralized and don't think it's possible. This isn't a new discussion. Is this big enough? No, this is not big enough at all. Huh? Is that better? Okay.
You can make the text go to 100%.
What? Oh, this one?
Yeah, make it the text white. Text width.
Oh, okay. All right. So, I never really know how to read one of these things out loud because it's Socrates. There's a dialogue going on between Adamantos and Socrates, but written by Plato. But it's also Socrates narrating the dialogue. So, JP, what do you think is the best?
Usually each paragraph is someone else.
Yeah, so we don't read the he saids and stuff like that?
Yeah.
No? Okay. All right, so I need a Socrates and an Adamantos.
Okay, I can do one of them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Somebody else? Yeah? I'm just going to request that you guys come close to the mic so we capture this.
Right.
Oh, if you want the...
Oh, you have the...
I only have one copy of this. You want this? Yeah, same thing that's on the board.
Now I am right upon that which we liken to the greatest weight. But I will speak, even if the deluge is going to have the laugh of us and swallow us up utterly in a wave of content. Do consider what I'm going to say.
Go on.
The philosophers must become kings in our cities, and those who are now called kings and potentates must learn to seek wisdom like true and genuine philosophers. And so political power and intellectual wisdom will be joined in one, and the crowds of nature who now pursue one or the other separately must be excluded. Until that happens, my dear Glaucon,
It's Glaucon, sorry.
there can be no rest from troubles for the cities, and I think for the whole human race. Until then, this constitution which we have now evolved in,
words.
which we have now involved in words, will never grow into being as something possible. It will never see the light of the sun. It will live only in our description. Now, this is what has made me so reluctant so long to speak, because I saw that it would run clean, contrary to opinion, for it is not easy to see that no other constitution could give happiness to man or the people.
Oh, Socrates, what a speech, what a doctrine you have thrown at our heads. Say this, and you'll have an army upon you in a jiffy. Don't make any mistake, and no contemptible adversaries. They will throw off their coats and come at you stripped. Each sees the first weapon he finds in a furious rush to wreak signal vengeance. If your logic does not defend you and keep them off, you will pay the penalty and be well and truly jeered at.
There's a few pages later now. I just skipped a few things.
I tell you, I will never give up trying until I persuade him and all the rest, or at least until we achieve something useful towards that life when they shall be born again, and there meet with discussions like this.
Who is he talking about?
Oh, right now he's talking about this system of constitution, this harmonic system of constitution that they've been trying to work through and develop for a type of state that had never been tried before, that involves a philosopher king and involves wise laws instead of just pragmatic laws or laws for pleasure. At this point, you have, well, at one point, he just finished saying in the past paragraph that that this state could never come into being until the philosophers become kings, or until the people who are already leaders, kings and potentates, themselves become true philosophers. And there will be no hope for mankind that he can see until that actually does occur.
Who is he trying to persuade? Like there's a skip and then
Yeah,
he
the
says,
thing that he's trying to persuade right now, the individual in question was Thrasymachos.
Oh, okay.
Thrasymachos, the entire book began with a discussion between him and Thrasymachos over, Thrasymachos took the view that justice is simply the will of the powerful, like might is right. Socrates obviously argued the inverse, and the whole book is based on how do you actually know what justice is for its own sake. And he looks at the state. He says, well, maybe it's hard to see in the individual, but perhaps if we look at what the individual is simply an atom or part of the smallest part of, it might be easier to see. And so he takes on the nation and humanity as a whole to see if it's maybe easier to find justice there.
Okay.
So that was basically Thrasymachos, and yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
That will be quite soon, of course, from your words.
A mere nothing compared with all the time. It is no wonder that the multitude do not believe that what we are saying, for they have never seen in existence the project now being discussed. Instead, they have heard of a lot of phrases such as these, arranged in an artificial assonance, not falling together into their natural pattern like ours do, and the man balanced and equated with virtue as nearly as possible to perfection, in word and deed, and, moreover, holding sovereignty in a city perfectly equated with him. This they have never seen. They have seen neither one man nor man than one.
No more men than one.
They have seen neither one man nor more man than one. Don't you agree?
I do. They never have.
And on the other hand, they have never cared to listen, bless you, with sufficient attention to words beautiful and generous, Words able to seek out the truth, the beautiful.
To seek out the truth.
Attentive.
Words able to seek out the truth attentively by every means for the sake of knowing, which keep a respectful distance from the clever sophistries that lead nowhere except to opinion and strife both in courts of law and in private discussions.
They listen to nothing of that sort.
This I foresaw, let me tell you, and this is the reason why I was afraid that time. Nevertheless, I spoke, because truth constrained me, and I dared to say that no city or constitution, or likewise man either, will ever become perfect until philosophers take charge of the state. Those few now dubbed not bad but useless. If some necessity of fortune throws it upon them, whether they wish or not, and compels the city to listen to them, or if true love or true philosophy comes over the sons of those who now are potentates and kings, or the men themselves, by some divine inspiration, it is not impossible that one or both of these things might happen. There is no reason in saying that they cannot, or we should fairly be laughed at as pious dreamers. Don't you agree?
I do.
If then it has ever happened in the extreme past times, or if it now is so in some barbaric place somewhere far out of our ken, or if it ever shall be that some necessity brings the highest philosophic nature to take charge of a city, then we are ready to maintain to the end of our contention that the described constitution has been and is, yes, and shall be realized whenever this muse gains power over a city. For the thing is not impossible, and we are not speaking of impossibilities. Difficulties there are indeed, even we admit that.
I think so too.
But the multitude do not think it possible. Is that what you will say?
Perhaps.
Bless you. Don't be so hard on the multitude. They will surely change their opinion if you suit them without controversy. If you undo this prejudice. Yeah. If you undo this prejudice against the love for learning by showing what you mean by philosophers, and if you define their nature and their practice as we have lately done, and convince the multitude that you do not mean those whom they now regard as philosophers. As soon as they see this, surely you will admit that they will get a different opinion and answer in a different way. Who will quarrel? Who will quarrel with the unquarrelsome? Who will grudge with the ungrudging? If he is himself ungrudging and gentle. I take the words out of your own lips and say that I believe a nature so quarrelsome and unkind exists only in a few, not in the many.
So I believe also. Be sure of that.
Then you surely believe also that the many are now unkind to philosophy only because of that gang of outsiders who have come rioting in where they have no business, abusing each other, behaving like lovers of wrangling, and always indulging in personalities, which is the thing least like philosophy.
Very true.
For the truth is, my dear
Adamantos.
Adamantos, my dear Adamantos, one who really keeps in mind, one who really keeps his mind on the things which are,
which are.
has no leisure to look below upon transactions of mankind and battling with them, to be infected by jealousy and ill will, but by seeing and contemplating things which are well ordered and ever unchangeable, each thing neither wronged or wronging another, but all things in concord and regulated by reason, we surely imitate these things and make ourselves most like to them. Or is it possible in any way, do you think, not to imitate what one converses with and admires?
Impossible.
Then conversing with the divine and orderly, the philosopher becomes orderly and divine so far as man can, but there is much unbalanced in all man.
Indeed there is.
Then, if it feels any constraint, not only to mold himself, if it feels any constraint, not only to mold himself, but to practice bringing into man customs both publicly and privately, what he see there, do you believe he will be a bad craftsman for the people, or of temperance and justice and all civic virtue?
By no means.
But if the multitude really perceive what we speak the truth about him, will they indeed be angry with philosophers and disbelievers when we say that a city could never be happy and fortunate unless it could be painted by these artists using the divine model?
Okay. So, okay. So what is this divine model that Plato's discussing? He goes on later on in that chapter to outline how do you actually educate this philosopher king? How do you create what type of curriculum would be necessary? And this is what was hitherto known as the quadrivium, where you have sort of a four-phased intellectual development that begins with arithmetic, plain two-dimensional geometry to investigate how things occur in two-dimensional world, then spherical geometry, solids, then astronomy, and how all that applies to astronomy. Simultaneously, he's been discussing this whole time the role of gymnastics and music for the spirit and the body, But we're going to focus today not really on the quadrivium per se, but that's something fun to really think more about, because the same problem was still there after he developed the curriculum, which did go into the basis of the Platonic Academy as a center of philosophy and science. This is all before you start getting into real philosophy, what he called the dialectic. Because the same problem, which was how do you ensure that these fields of learning are going to be used wisely? Right? How will you not use your knowledge of mathematics to create computer models and create new derivatives, right? Or gymnastics not just be a bully, But how are you actually what's going to allow the student to develop a certain instinct of using these things wisely? And there's nothing intrinsically in any of these things that will permit that. Now, Plato's way of resolving that problem is by going to the discoveries made by the Pythagoreans, and that turns out to offer some fruit. So the Pythagoreans were a grouping of individuals who followed the teachings of Pythagoras. This is an individual who studied in Egypt, and they kept most of their teachings relatively secret. You had to go through like rites of initiation and all sorts of things to clear the mind from the clutter of the anyhow. It had certain quirks about it. But the fundamental discovery was in this question of harmony and how it is that the infinite possible divisions upon a string, of all of the infinite possible sounds that can be produced of the infinite divisions, there's specific intervals that produce concordance, a certain harmonic concordance, which our soul responds to. And you could even say it satisfies the mind as well. And on some effect, too, I think you could say that sound does affect bodies just in general. There's a certain biological effect of sound. But they didn't really think about that. They were more thinking about, their discovery was just in the question of how do you divide, what are these intervals, and how is it the mind of man can come to know where they are. Using the two separated worlds of geometry and music and sound, so sight and sound, which are two sort of contradictory senses. Now, the first basis, which is why we've constructed a little monochord here, and it has its problems, but it's otherwise a good monochord. This is actually a duo chord. It's not fulfilling its namesake right now. Shit. Thank you. Good catch. Good call. All right. Has anybody not seen one of these? Sort of?
I don't think I've seen.
Never seen a monochord? Never seen a monochord? Okay. No. All right. It is what it is. At some point, you guys might want to eventually get closer in to see what we're going to be doing. But we're going to see if we can at least, we'll see how far we can get in the course of the night's events, maybe for another hour or so, in constructing these things and trying to make some discoveries. The first, I guess I could say the first, the first thing I'll just tell you right off the bat, the introduction to the monochord involves an understanding of the octave. On a piano, it's basically, speaking of harmony, on a piano, what you have is a low do to a high do. Right? There are two sounds which, no, that was bad, but whatever. The idea is that the two sounds have a certain identity, which is common, but the pitch is different. Do you guys have an idea of how to produce those two sounds on a chord? If we just started with a chord without any idea, all we know is it makes this sound. Can you guys in the back hear that? Yeah? You know where we might take our first hypothesis to make that first division to get two sounds that would give us an octave? You guys said take a shot. Huh? Yeah?
Well, you probably want to separate the sheet of paper in equal distances and figure out how far is the distance on the chord, like from the original note that you want to produce.
You're saying you hear that first note, and you have...
And you want to reproduce it, so you make, like they say, so and the only way to actually know where you touch the chord and remember it is to put signs. And so
Okay.
You draw
Right.
a line and you put signs on the side and you experiment.
Okay, so you could just sort of look and approximate maybe here. I'll do a line and see what it sounds like.
Trial and error.
Trial and error, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do what you can.
Yeah, and I could keep on finding something which is like.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just make sure that they're the same. Yeah, I tuned them earlier, but they may have. Actually, this paper is not working out very well. No, they're not the same now. They got added to them. Good one. So what we can do, actually, as long as they're tuned to the same tension, the sound will be the same. No.
getting there. Just tighten
The one on
this
the left
a
is
little
higher.
bit.
The left one, eh? No. Shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be easier if you put it on the table actually.
Okay, let's do it.
That's pretty close.
It's close, huh? Okay. Oh, Meredith. Thank you, my man. Thank you. All right, we can proceed. Okay.
Pretty much everybody reacts.
It is universal.
There you go.
All right, so the first hypothesis was trial and error. So we could start picking off spots, right? And just keep on. So we can pick any infinite spot we want, right? And just sort of keep on doing it until we get something that sounds like what we're looking for.
You could do that,
Yeah,
or
do
you could just separate like the entire sheet. Like let's say if you les intervalles de 1 centimètre, and you say okay, this is one note, and this other one, 1 centimètre and plus loin, you try, and you find out okay, that's another note, and it's probably going to be the same distance. Like all the notes are going to be always the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, you could do that. Sure, why not? Yeah, so if you could totally do that. At a certain point, though, what if you never come across one that actually does produce that octave that you were seeking? That they're always a little off.
Well, they're always going to be off because you only use like the ear.
Mm-hmm. So it's always an approximation, right?
Yeah.
Is there in any way? That's true. See, what she's saying is that as long as we're approximating, we're never going to be able to get it exactly. It'll always get like infinitely closer, but it won't ever be exactly right. Yeah.
I think if you trust your ear, you can get it exact.
If you trust your ear.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a very
But-
good ear.
But then how do you know it couldn't be more exact?
How do you know that those two sound the same?
Well, what if we're using the same chord? What if we use the same chord? If I use this chord instead of like comparing the two, assuming that they're, because you're right, they're not perfectly in tune.
No.
Right.
Well, no, I'm saying that they are.
They
Or,
could.
or like,
Oh, if we actually did make them perfectly in tune?
well, I think they are. They are. You know, they're pretty much in tune right now.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. So you're saying if you really trust your ear?
I think you can use your ear to find the octave. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that, and you're saying that you can get it exactly perfectly, like perfectly the octave,
Pretty close. Yeah.
just by simply looking at it?
Not by looking at it, by listening.
By listening.
Moving the pen and listening and clicking.
Okay.
There's always a little thing, but even Kepler said there's sometimes you just don't hear it, but it's different. It's so minute.
Mhm.
Like, but still, everybody here, when you get the right.
It's satisfying, yeah. Like it would please your sense. You would find the note, but in terms of its division upon the string, you wouldn't know because at a certain point, the note really wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to detect in your ear a difference, even if you do this. If you have that sound, or like, is there a difference that you can hear?
Yeah. No.
But yet I'm moving it just minutely. So it is a different division, but the sound is pretty much the same, right? So it could get by. But if we wanted to find that that exact place upon the string where you would get a perfect octave, then simply approximation wouldn't produce that for you. Right? Like you could get something satisfying to your ear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But where would you think to cut it then? Like if we you guys want to sing this? Meredith, want to sing with me? Yeah.
We're trying for the octave.
Yeah, trying for the octave.
You should compare it to
close, huh? Okay. Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay. So that, if I was looking at that, I would say that it's approximately, it looks like it's approximately, oh, do you guys hear the sound? You want to sing that? Let's go. Sounds like it passes for an octave? Tone deaf? Yeah. Well, I would say that it sounds about right to me. And just by looking at it visually, I'd say that the place that the pencils or our division fell upon is somewhere approximately around the middle, right? Now,
Does that mean that clicking the other side would also be the octave?
what do you mean?
If you pluck the other side of the pen.
If I pluck the other side of the pen?
Yeah.
What do you mean? You
Well,
mean
like we were plucking.
oh, like this? Yeah, that means that this sound would be the same as this sound. Oh,
Oh.
aha.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I guess. No. The other way. Yeah? Okay. So, if I were to say that that was the direct division of the string into two equal parts, how could we test that hypothesis? Is there any way that we could absolutely divide the string knowably into two parts equally, or other than simply approximation, or all we have is the only thing we have at our disposal? Like if we had like a string here, and we wanted to divide it directly into two equal parts, would we only have the approximation thing going, like we tried so far with the ear, or how would we be able to test it out to actually divide the string into two equal parts knowably?
We can fold it in two.
Fold it in two. Okay. Would you say that method, if you actually did fold it in two, would that method be superior than simply approximating it? Like, would that be definitely the right answer if you connected this line and that line together and you got a division here? If you did that, you could say that that's definitely, truthfully, a division of two, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that method, if you use that method to divide in two, and somebody else used the method of just sort of like looking at it and saying, well, let's try to approximate it, like let's just look at it and, you know, just try to get something that looks the same, you'd say that method would be superior than their explanation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's, this is indeed the basis for Pythagoras' investigation, because the first question is, how do you actually know something truthfully when you're approaching this subject of harmony? And something as basic as this, in the production of the boundary conditions of the octave, of the lowest and highest sound, are really important, because how does your mind actually come to know what those boundary conditions are that you're operating within? Now, keep in mind, an octave is an octave because it's not just two notes, right? As the name implies, that you do have a series of other notes in the middle as well. Now, the next thing you could do if you wanted to keep on just dividing the string, like if you divided this, you could divide it again, right? You could do like a second division with the same action, right, to produce a cut that's directly midway between the half. And this is the first of the three means between two extremes. So if we're dealing with two extremes in terms of boundary, in terms of the introduction to what Pythagoras is doing. Oh, you okay? Oh, all right. Bye. In terms of what Pythagoras is doing, he puts there's a lot of emphasis that goes in, and Kepler picks this up as well, of what are the different means between these extremes. The first one is the arithmetic mean. So if you have any two, there's a direct midway point directly between the two extremes, right? Such that if that's 0.5 and that's 1 in terms of a distance, this is 0.75. Or you could say also 3/4, right? Because that's 3/4 of the whole string. And 3/4 produces a certain sound. Now, in our string, because when the monochord was made, it was made with without the consideration that we'd be dividing this thing up in equal places, so it has sort of an odd distance to it, which makes our lives a little bit harder, but we're going to try our best at least to figure this out, maybe with the help of a calculator. It's 46 3/4 inches. So I measured this just before you guys got here, and the chord itself has a total length of 46 3/4 inches. That's the whole. That's our unity. Is that? Oh, good. Yeah. Now, let's start building this thing up. Actually, if we don't have any marks on our string yet, but if we were going to begin and we've established that we want to mark off the halfway mark, then we might as well do that right away. Could somebody with a calculator, Sam? Could you tell me what the halfway would be between, or what is half of 46.75?
23.375.
23.375. All right.
That's 23 3/8.
3/8? Okay. Yeah, I know. They don't have these giant wooden things in metric. They do? I've never seen one. I've never seen one. All right, so that's the half. Okay, I don't know if you guys want to bring your chairs closer. It's kind of hard. That's why I wanted to stand it up, but it didn't work out. Okay, all right. And that was indeed about where we approximated it. It's not too far from where we originally assumed.
And the other side? Okay.
Yeah, that.
The other side of the string?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, but that could be the intonation. That could be the intonation of your instrument.
Could be. The intonation? You mean just the make of the instrument, you mean?
Well, the pen might then be like the tone.
Oh, the pen.
It doesn't matter that much, but it might let you do this.
Yeah, get something sharper.
I got one of these
Well, actually,
rulers.
but if you stretch the string, that's going to change the intonation.
It will, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want something that doesn't.
That depends.
Yeah, I don't think.
The intonation has to do with the actual box itself. Like, on the guitar, it has to do with the guitar neck, not just the strings.
Mm.
Yeah, it's not
Very close.
It's.
Pretty good.
I guess for the time being, we'll assume it was there's some mechanical error in our craftsmanship. But we've got our division of a half. We can also, now that we're on it, the same action of dividing produced another division of 3/4. So could you take that, what was it, 23 and a bit, and divide that again by 2 as well? See what we get?
You want 1/4 of 46?
Yes.
Please.
So that's 11.585.
11.585? All right. So, all right, I'm just taking my...
Did you divide 46.75? What is it? 46.7?
Oh, yeah, sorry, no, I didn't.
Hmm?
Yes.
It's 11.6875.
Okay, here, I'll use the 16th one.
Okay.
So it's 11 and 11 sixteenths.
11 and 11 sixteenths?
Yeah.
Okay.
A 16th is half an eighth if you don't have
Yeah. Wait a minute. Oh, I don't have sixteenths. It's just half an eighth.
Yeah.
It's like here.
So
Yeah.
5 and a half eighths.
All right. All right, let's see what that sounds like. All right, so this is our arithmetic mean. No, that's not good. Okay. Pascal, you want to sing the small one? Yeah. Okay. Okay, you ready? Anybody else want to join? He was a little off. That's okay.
What about the other side?
This side here?
And how does that compare to the full? How does that compare to the full string?
I don't know about that. It's hard to. No, it's so out of the octave. It's hard to.
That's 1/4. Because they have to be in consonant, like a harmonic division, right? The three parts of the string have to all be in agreement.
Mhm.
If one of them disagrees, then it.
Yeah, it's just that right now it's hard to see. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to see right now. I would say it sounds pretty good. But. Hmm? Good. Okay. Would you guys say that this sounds relatively consonant with each other? All right. So we got two divisions so far. Now, I said there were three means. I'm not going to talk about one of them so much right now because I'll point it out, what it is, very briefly. But this won't really affect what we're doing as it stands. You have one which is known as the geometric mean, which, if you get into, if you start looking at a three-dimensional figure, then, and we can go into actually figuring out what's behind this later. Taking the direct diagonal of a square and dropping it down will produce a certain cut that will be of the geometric length. Now, a lot of you guys did not work around this, and that's not my class, so I'm just pointing out that that's one of them, which we can, after class, maybe look at more in depth.
Oh, I see.
It's okay.
That's interesting.
The one that the one that we're going to be looking at in accordance with this one here is called the harmonic mean. Which is simply when you take a line, you divide it into 3, and you take the 2/3, this point here, which demarcates a cut of 2/3 along the whole line, right? That's what the Pythagoreans call the harmonic mean. Yes, Petros?
What note does the geometric mean produce? It produces a note.
It's not. It's not commensurable with the string as a whole because that length is not something. It's a number that'll go on for basically forever.
Oh,
And right now, because it's not commensurable with the string, it's not something we're going to concern ourselves with. But the quality of the arithmetic mean is that as the smaller part, what we just went through with the 3/4, as the smaller part is to the half is to the whole. So you have a certain relationship that's being maintained. The reason, one of the qualities that you'd find about the harmonic mean is that as the smaller part of, which is, you could say is 1/3, relates to the half or the octave, So the bigger part relates to the whole.
Do that again?
Yeah. So as the you've produced two fractions as soon as you made a cut. You made a cut, so there's three. There's always going to be three different units as soon as you make a cut. You've got the two parts that you just produced, and you've got the whole. And that's all you're really doing in harmonics is you're looking at how the parts relate to a whole. So with this, you've produced a smaller one, which is 1/3, because you've divided the whole into 3 equal lengths. Now, as the smaller part relates to the half, right, in terms of its length, so you'll find that the same proportion of the longer part, the 2/3, will be maintained as it relates to the whole.
So you're saying 1/3 is to 1/2 as 2/3 is to 1.
Yeah, you could write it out this way if you wish. So is to half as 2/3 is to 1. Or you could write 1 any way you want. But so this is essentially the same relationships. They're just different distances, but the relationships are the same. Which is why we do this little dot that Meredith had fun explaining in his class on doubling the square or the cube. So
You're saying that 2/3 is the harmonic mean. That's 1/3.
no, 2/3 is the harmonic mean. It has the quality about it. It has the unique quality that of all the possible proportions, the only place where you're going to get this relationship is at the 2/3. Every other relationship that you could possibly create will not have that relationship. Similarly, of all of the possible relationships that you can get, the only one that will produce the small to the half as the half is to the whole will be in the arithmetic mean between these two extremes. It's directly halfway. So it's like a linear cut. This is not a linear cut. So it has a distinct quality about it. Now here's the problem. If we wanted to if we wanted to cut a line into 3 parts, right? We have a line, we want to figure out what 3 equal divisions of a line would look like. How do we do that? You see, if it seems easy for you guys, it's probably because you're not thinking about it enough.
Yeah, we do it one time.
Have you guys tried to do this? If you have a line of a certain given length, and you would like to find 3 equal divisions of that line, what do you have to do? How would you go about figuring out what those 3 equal divisions are?
With a piece of string that's foldable?
Well, you go with half.
You mean just have a piece of string that's foldable, so you fold it in half or something?
Like you're saying, if we're working with something we can fold on itself?
Yeah.
Why can't you just fold it into 3 parts like you did with the 2 parts?
Well, let's say you were. Let's turn this thing off. So you have your. Let's say we'll call this our string for now. We can find one that would be good. So you got your string. You want to come here? You're saying you could just. What are you doing? Like just fold it the same way?
Yeah, just estimate where 1/3 is, and fold it over,
Mm-hmm.
make the second fold, and then just make it even.
But is that going to be truthful then, or is it just an estimation?
Well, it's as perfect as mankind can do in this imperfect self.
Without making a discovery of something truthful. It might get us by, but no, I think we can. I think we can get a little bit better than that.
Huh?
You can measure the length and then divide it into 3.
What if it's one of these lengths like 10? That's fine if it's a length like 9, right?
Okay.
What if it's a length like 10? Or like ours is 46 3/4.
Paper.
Go on.
In an envelope, you just take the paper and when you fold it like that, 2/3.
That's it. Open it up. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Are those three sections exactly alike?
Well, fast, but
Are they perfectly alike, or are they really, really close to being alike? Well, how'd you make that first cut? Like that first fold that you made a cut on your paper? How'd you make that?
It's impossible to achieve perfectly.
Hold on. Before we throw out the word impossible so much, let's think about it.
When you say mankind creating perfectly, isn't that whole point of Plato that we can never achieve perfection? We get closer to it.
Well, he said something. You said that we can know the world always more perfectly,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean you can't know something. That doesn't mean you can't know truth. You can just know it more perfectly. But tell me, like, how is the concept in your mind of a purport of this, like this idea, for example? You realize that you can get a concept of that in your mind, right? Like why that's a harmonic mean, or like why that relationship is unique,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And you can get an idea of like why this string folds perfectly into two by folding it, right? Can it be known any more perfectly? Can you come up with an idea where that dividing string into two can be known more perfectly in that case?
I mean, find a way to fold it in two better? To make
Yeah,
it
like to
perfect
produce a better
division?
reasoning process to explain how you would find the equal division of a line into two parts than what we just came up with. It's pretty good, huh?
No, I mean, what? Tell us. What is it?
No, I don't think that you... I think that's pretty... I mean,
By folding it, right? That's
By
what
folding
you
it,
mean.
yeah.
Is there a better way to actually find half of the string than by folding it?
I don't know. Is that?
it satisfies your reason. It satisfies what we desire in terms of, something which appeals to our reason.
Okay, so because
And,
you hang
and
the
actually
pieces
is
next to each other
verified.
afterwards, and you see that they are the same length, you are sufficiently satisfied
Yeah,
that they are the same length, right?
Yeah.
So if you do that by folding it in three, and you have three pieces that you have that are the same length, why is
The
that
difference
not
is one I know is not an approximation. The other one I'm not convinced is not an approximation. The three, in fact, will in the current way that we're thinking about it, will always be an approximation. Whereas this one I know will not be an approximation by virtue of the process.
Why? What changes when you have two strings that you're comparing versus three?
You should ask the question.
Was that?
Try
Yeah, can you use geometric means? You do
Sam.
what you did before with the boxes.
Try with a piece of string.
To make three?
Yeah.
The geometric mean?
Yeah, and then you use the diagonal, and you like you did before when you folded them, and you make two of them. So when they fold over, where they start overlapping, that's going to be your mean.
Oh, you're saying like have like two boxes here? You're saying like your idea is have two boxes
Right.
with two
Yeah.
means?
And then when you drop them,
When you drop them, you get a division of you get this original line that's divided now into three. Well, yeah, you could work with that, but then you'd want to see, well, first of all, what was the length of this line, right? Such that we'll know where it cuts off our bottom line. Right. And similarly, when we find that out, we'll be able to know what the distance is here versus the distance here. Right. So, do you know how to get the length here for the diagonal? Huh? Okay, well,
Keep shuffling.
Yeah.
if you wanted to use the Pythagorean theorem, well, we didn't really prove that, even though we're talking about Pythagoras right now.
Good. Yeah.
Hmm?
It's pretty good.
All
That's
right.
it? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
it is pretty sweet.
It's not perfect, but tell me a better way. What's the better way?
Well, I made these really interesting. They're a shape you guys might have heard about before.
Let's say you can't fold a piece of G properly.
Yeah,
Then you gotta have
these are circles.
Yeah.
These are circles. Now, would you agree that it's possible to imagine a line that's curved around a circle and takes on the shape of a circle? Okay. If that line was our first one that we were starting with, how would we divide that line into two? Now taking into our, we don't have a line that we're dividing.
Cut the circle into.
Yeah, right. We got the circle into. Yeah. So our line now, our circular shaped line, is now divided into two equal parts. Right? What if we did it again to get our That was to get our octave. But what if we wanted to get our arithmetic mean? We'd have to divide it to 4 equal parts, right? We should divide it to 2. What would we do?
Fold it again.
Yeah. Why would it fold in over itself? Okay. All right. All right, that was easy. What about dividing this thing into 3 equal portions? Would it be maybe easier to get your mind around something like a circle? Yeah, let's try it. Here. Do you guys have a hypothesis that popped into your minds as I said that?
Could you repeat that? What was
If you were going to divide a circle into 3 equal parts, do you have an idea what you might try first?
The trick.
If you want, if it might help you as a visual aid to draw like a little center in the middle of it, because right now there are none. That's something you could try. They're not perfect circles, as you've noticed.
It won't work.
But
Get them out.
I'm
You're setting us up for failure.
Okay.
Who cut these?
I don't know.
Oh, anyone?
I'm gonna try this. See the tape?
You're pretty good like
Do you want to ruin it?
I don't think you can hear it.
I'll try and make some more. What you doing? What you doing?
Making a circle on the floor.
Ah.
Why?
Yeah, I want. If you can make a swan, you get $1. But you also fail the class.
There you go.
See? Oh. Don't show anybody. No, don't look over. Hey, eyes down in the circle.
Do it on your own. So this way, we have something.
Where do you divide it? How did you hold it to get those? Yeah.
Did I do it?
4. Then you divide in 6. Then you just take 2 parts.
How's dividing?
Well,
Matt.
that's 4.
Yeah.
And then you have to divide again. So fold it. And or you can divide it. Well,
Okay.
With this one.
What? It seems like you guys are thinking on the same lines here, but I don't think it's. You gotta prove to me right now how it is that this is exactly what is it? That this is exactly the same as that is the same as that.
not a perfect circle. So it's not the same.
No, that the reason's plus 7 is
Well, it's because c'est diamètre.
Appeal to my reason. Is this like this? Whoa. It's 20-sided.
Oh, well, I have to fold it in a proportional way, right?
That's not what we want to get.
No, I'm looking for 3 equal divisions. It's not. I should probably make some more.
What happens when you get their different pieces? 4, 2, 3, 4. 6 different triangles.
That's equal to that. That's equal to that.
Right.
I can see how that's equal to that.
Yeah, that's equal to that. Therefore, this is equal to that.
Right, that should be produced in
For the inscribed
That
square?
would be that would be 8
Oh,
equal sides.
no, fine.
Yeah.
It's the perimeter of your circle.
That is a square.
You do it by
That would be also a square. And the thing about 2 and 3 is that they don't get along that well. They don't. They're not. Yeah. You know. Yeah.
What if you,
I don't know if
What if you show us?
Hold up. This is. I talked about discoveries, not cheating.
I got it.
Oh, look at you. Put that down. Put that down. Put that down.
No, it's a faker.
Okay. Yeah,
Got it?
that works. I'll give it a couple more minutes.
Mine would work. It's just-
Yeah, we got a winner.
You kinda-
You win another circle.
Oh no, okay, good. Yeah, what if?
Hmm?
I think I got it, but I don't want to say go. Perfect.
Show it to me.
Yeah,
Show me if you guys can see it.
I didn't do it, but I got
do it.
Yeah.
Right on the board.
That's so easy. Yeah, that's budget a bit.
It's pretty epic.
I mean,
It's pretty epic.
let me do my own circle.
Did you already ruin all of these circles?
No, no. Oh, that's true. That's strange because suppose the apex of the triangle is 12 That's not what it means. You did it? You got it? Not yet? You got any shapes?
I got many shapes.
Yeah, any shapes? Like what? Like a square?
Yeah.
You got a square? Okay. Oh, you got an inside square. Okay. All right.
Oh, no. It is good. Right?
Yeah, so now the question is.
Let me actually drop it
You
back.
have to.
Yeah,
What is
what?
it? You have to. What is
You want to create a triangle.
triangle.
Yeah.
Now.
You want to cut the string in.
Here, would this work? Yes. If you could prove that that's actually
That's a triangle.
Okay, how would you do it? So I'm going to show you here.
Okay.
I'm going to go.
1, 2, 3. But you have 4.
Due to the fact that time is valuable and sadly fleeting, I will show you briefly that Alain's solution involved generating a triangle out of our circle. Now, I'm going to give it a few more minutes for you guys to play with that to actually see if you can do it yourselves. But that is the key. And you do see how that does divide the circle into 3 equal sides, right? Make sense? Now that's kind of what you were getting at too, because 15 isn't divisible. It isn't. You have like you have a mini shape, but it would relate to the triangle. And what you want to do is to make it simpler for yourself, try and get a triangle.
Amen.
Yes. Yeah. Whoa. Anybody wants more of these things? 25 cents each now. They're a rare commodity. Huh? Yeah, you got it, man.
So it's a question of matching.
Oh, that's all these.
Yes.
That's all these. How did you do that? How did you know where to
Because when you do it, you know you can get that right, and that's exactly a quarter.
Yeah.
And then all I did was just take where it hits, bring it and then touch the edge. But I know, well, I mean, I just know from, so that you know that you have your radius going along the circumference. So that gives you your direction. And then and that gave me this much. right? And then I just folded along the line, took it to the end.
Alright, that's cool. Sweet.
What, is that it?
Yeah. That's it? Is that it? No.
Now what you've got
Is
now.
that, is that a triangle that has three equal sides?
Radii, right?
No.
I proved it with, I mean,
Nice try.
What if you divide it?
I didn't.
Well, it looks like the one in that other hand was the same thing that Maruna just did.
If those are indeed,
Oh, that's how you're gonna divide the radius. You'll do it like that.
this,
That gives you another radius.
And then you do
I
the
took,
same.
I rolled it in half, so
Okay,
it's
radius
radius.
is around.
So you have this
This is the diameter.
That's the
And folding it this way, you're looking at the diameter of dividing it. So that gives you
Same
four, but now what you've got is in addition to the circle divided into four, and you've got the length of the radius. It works better with some ways to divide the radius.
So, because you have two.
Divide
You
the
have that
radius.
one. And you have the other one.
Yeah, if.
Why do you need a compass for that?
No, I'm saying that.
Now-
that's not perfect. That's what we're shooting in the middle part.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying with a compass, you're gonna see it more clearly what you did. All right. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to give away the answer here,
No, the second.
but we're going to move on. We're going to move on a little bit because we have a lot of ground to cover in like 20 minutes. So basically, the trick was the triangle was the solution. A couple of people got it. Anybody who doesn't have a compass should pick one up and rack your brain to figure out how to do that with when you get home. But with the triangle, you will get three equal divisions relatively perfectly. That will get us what we were seeking, which was our harmonic mean.
Not really.
Now this bears a fun question, which blows the mind of a lot of people, both in arts and science, which is, what is the sound of a triangle? Yeah, and it's not esoteric. It's got an answer, and it's approximately due to the fact that we have a crappy instrument here. We will approximate with our calculator to get our division, but at least now that we have knowledge that it can be equally divided, it'll we won't lose too much sleep over it. Now, Sam, with your calculator, could you take that and divide it by 3, please?
By what?
3.
15.583 repeating.
15.583.
So Sam, just subtract 15 and multiply by 16.
What?
Subtract the 15 and multiply by 16, and it'll give you the 16ths of an inch.
Subtract 15.
So what is it again? It's 15.
9.316.
Yeah.
Okay.
15.916.
Yeah.
No, nine,
Well,
9.3,
9.16.
9.3 sixteenths.
Oh, I see. Like,
Over
how do I write that?
Over 16.
9.3 over 16.
Yeah.
Oh. All right.
You won't get the 0.3, but
Sorry. For the sake of our. All right, 15.
Barbaric ears.
There we go. Okay, so it's 2/3, 3/4. Okay. All right. Peel your ears, or squint your ears. Try and see the sound. Okay. Oh.
to the whole.
To the hole.
Yeah.
All right, let's try to make something a little fun happen here. let's have everybody. You're going to represent the middle of the room, okay? And everyone to the right side is going to sing the low, and everyone to the left side is going to sing the high.
My right.
Yeah, like you're right, my wrong. Sorry. All right, so you guys, what did I say? High on this side, low on that side. Okay, so high first. Don't be shy.
Can't hear you.
Okay. Low. So you guys got some competition. All right. Let's try it. Both together. You first, and then they'll join in. All right. It's okay. Vote the other one now. Okay. All right. Same thing. This is the arithmetic mean, 3/4. Okay. All right. It's not so bad. It's kind of nice. Mm-hmm.
Which one sounds
Who's the critic? Who's?
So what are the shapes?
Well, that's one thing we actually didn't address. We skipped that, eh? What shape would be produced by the circle that would cut off 4 parts?
Square.
Right. So we're dealing with here. The arithmetic mean is in accord with the square, and what we're dealing with here is our harmonic triangle. Now, the Pythagoreans put a lot of emphasis on the relationship of those two, which they used to construct their entire octave. Their entire scale was used with the relationship of. This is kind of quick here, but 2/3, 3/4. Now, getting the tone, the tone in between these two, like really, it's hard for me to explain, but getting the tonal relationship between these two is how how the entire chord is produced. So you got two relationships of two different sizes, 2/3 of a whole, 3/4 of a whole, and I'll just say it. Essentially, if you wanted to get what I'm discussing here as this tone, then, well, what you would do is put them both onto the same chord, because 2/3 and 3/4, they're 3 and 4 are incommensurable. You can't divide 3 into 4 and get an even number. Vice versa, 4 into 3 won't give you an even number at all. So what you'd want to do is take the 3 and the 4 and find what's a number that they both have in common, that they both divide evenly into. You said that? Yeah, right. So taking a chord of an entire length of 12, which is common to both, how would 2/3 change if 3 became 12? How would 2 change? 6. 8, yeah. 8. So imagine we had, I guess you'd say, all right, so we got 6, 12 to the whole. 8 would be up here. All right, and how would 3/4 change?
That would be 10. That's 10.
9.
That's 11.
That's 11.
Right.
Hmm?
On the 12. I mean, we're not
I'm sorry?
talking about.
You're not hitting
when-
the right marks there.
Oh shit! Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm screwing that up a lot, eh? Sorry. Don't believe your senses. 10, 9. That's 9, and there are 8 here. Right. Okay. So the relationship here of 8 to 9 will produce what later comes to be known as the major tone. Now, I'm not going to go through how the Pythagoreans use that to build up their scale, but we could do that maybe after the class. Because for the time being, I'm sticking with Kepler and his work on Book 3 of the Harmonies, and how Kepler basically took this forward. He made certain discoveries that the Pythagoreans were a little blocked on. But they sort of, when the Pythagoreans were doing it, they were sort of stopping. They stopped with the square and the triangle. Kepler didn't do that. And he actually went further to ask, well, if we have, all right, let's do it this way. Right. So if we have our 1/2, our 3/4, and you could say its remainder would be 1/4, because with every fraction of a whole, you got a remainder, right? The part that you're looking at and the other part that's left over. When you directly cut it in half, you simply had 2 halves that were equal. That's the octave. What we just established with the triangle produces 2/3 and 1/3. Right? Are there any other fractions that will exist within this triangle? Or are these the only 2 that exist?
Beside one.
Yeah, beside 1. What's another shape? Well, if we had time, we would construct this here, but essentially, another simple shape would involve doubling the sides of the triangle. And you can get what's called, you guys know what this shape is called?
Cube.
Oh yeah, it's sort of like a cube. But yeah, no, it's a hexagon, yeah. Yeah. All right, what divisions of the string will the hexagon cut? Make that here, actually. Yeah. All right, so we got here 1/6, 5/6. Are there any else, or are there any others that aren't accounted for in the previous 3 cuts that we made? 2/6 would be the same as 1/3, so that wouldn't be it. 3/6 would be the same as 1/2, so we don't need that. 4/6, no. So basically, it's just these 2. What else? You guys know your shapes. What are we? What's another one we can try out? Octagon? Octagon. All right, octagon. Okay, octagon. Make that here. Okay, what are the divisions that we can find of the octagon?
1/8.
Yeah, obviously the two easy ones. 1/8, 7/8, which is the remainder of, right, the 1/8. Would you say 3/8? Yeah. And its remainder? Oops. Yeah. Hmm? Is it?
Odd number. C'est les nombres impairs.
Right. Back. So we got those. And these. So we've not tried these out yet. Anything else? Well, give me another simple one. Because if we got a shape that has 3 sides, 4 sides, 6 sides, 8 sides, pentagon, yeah. We won't take the time to construct the pentagon today, as that's always a fun headache in itself. But that would give us also, well, barring the fact that you need to first discover the golden section to produce it, which, if we just take for granted that the golden section can be discovered, that it exists, and that you can construct the 5-sided shape, then what divisions do we have to work with here? Obviously, there's 1/5. And its inverse is 4/5. Anything else, or is that it?
2/5.
Yeah, both you guys are right. Okay. 2/5, 3/5. Okay, good. All right. So let's try to see where they fall into our little chords, see what they sound like. And I think it's getting kind of late, so maybe we can slowly wind it down. All right, so let's do the, what is it, 3/4? We'll do the hexagon. 5/6. Sam, could you do your magic again with the 46 and 3/4? Yeah.
Want to read the six?
Yep, please.
So 1/6 is 7.79.
7.79. Okay. Let's see if we do this.
Which,
Somebody have an extra pencil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's 12 and
Thanks.
just over 13/16.
So 7 and 13/16.
Yeah,
Okay.
7 and just under 13/16.
Hey Meredith, could you do this? I'm having trouble thinking about 16ths. Yeah.
Okay, 7, and so this is 12/16. It's actually 12 and a half 16ths. Let's read about there.
Good. All right. Cool. All right. So let's write down on top of it.
1/6.
That's the 5/6. Yeah. Just write down 5/6. Let's also mark down. Let's find out what the 5/8 is. Yeah. Yep.
29.2.
Really? 29.2?
Divided by what? 5/8?
I mean, not exactly, but.
But yeah, no, of course. Yeah. All right.
You already saw 1.5.
So just over 2/8. So what did we say? 29 and.
You said 29.2.
Oh, sorry.
Is that true? It seems like it could be right.
3.5, 3.5, 16. So
29. Would
Oh.
it convert to in years?
that would be 5/8. So we're going from this end now.
No, it's calculated from. Oh, if you right. Yeah. You want to turn it this way?
What was it? It was 29, eh? 29.
29.2.
Okay, 29 and 3.5 16ths.
There's no such thing as a circle. You mean like a perfect circle that can't be made any more perfectly?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So then why are we finding truth in something that doesn't exist? Yeah. I mean, you can find truth in something that doesn't exist, but does that make that truth?
What we're investigating is how does your mind relate to the universe as a whole? Because can you conceive of something like a circle in your mind?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So how does that help govern how you problem solve in the material world in which you're?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, what else?
That's what is that? Half? No, it's 5/8. Okay. 5/8. What are we missing here? 4/5. Let's do 4/5 and. Keep in mind, what we're doing when we're, for all you guys who can't see the monochord, we're looking for all of those divisions that fall between the half and the 1. Everything that falls outside of it, like that's smaller than a half, we're not so interested right now because it's outside of our boundary conditions. So things like 1/8, 3/8, you know, we're more looking at the 5/8, because it's between the boundary conditions, right? It's between the octave. You guys see that? Like, you make sense why we're ignoring some of them right now? No? Not so much?
But if you had 1/8, that would be within an octave as well, right?
If I had 1/8?
Like if you were to play 1/8 of a string, that would have.
That would be in its own octave. That's outside of the... We've set ourselves the boundary conditions of the half. That's the highest note, and there's the lowest. So anything that's higher than that, we're not really looking right now because we're looking for everything that falls between the highest and the lowest that we've got. It's the open string.
So if you played 1/8, wouldn't that be within the first octave? It would be a fourth open string.
It'd be a fourth, yeah, it'd be 4 octaves up.
9 point.
Yeah. That's like some other octave that's we're not playing with.
So you're trying to find Victoria. Genre la majeure et la mineure.
C'est ça.
Basically, yeah.
Tous les temps.
Okay. What else, buddy?
All right.
1/8
So what do we got?
do, right?
You got
And then
4/5.
4/5. What about 3/5?
L'octave, disons,
Yeah.
ce beat octave.
One times two.
Donc, c'est un huitième,
Les 2/8. Ben oui. Oui, dans ce sens.
Donc,
Mais
les demi-tons, c'est
Okay,
entre
so it's going to be
les deux.
18.
Donc, c'est la moitié.
est-ce que c'est la
entre
même?
les
Est-ce
deux.
que c'est la même distance entre les deux? C'est vrai qu'on fait. C'est là que tu verrais qu'il y a un problème.
C'est la même distance.
C'est pour ça qu'il y a
Okay.
différentes
Alright.
manières d'accorder les tons.
And do we want 7/8?
C'est lequel vous avez
Yeah,
appelé?
sure, why not?
Je pense que
Let's
c'est
see if
ceux
it's
qui
from Rock or not.
ont l'accord de base.
But I can't explain to people why it's not.
Donc, ça-
So,
Because of the year. That's how
yeah,
you
but there's another way,
Ça dépend,
another
il y a
more scientific way that they have on the website.
comme,
I guess whatever, yeah.
Okay. En fait, toutes les divisions vont être égales entre les tons, demi-tons. Ça va donner un drôle de son.
Un ton quoi?
Ça va donner des taux d'intervalle. C'est exactement les mêmes.
C'est le piano de base, déjà le piano forte. Est-ce que tu parles de
Ouais, mais peu
l'instrument
importe le
fort?
piano, peu importe le piano, comment tu vas accorder.
All right. Anything else?
Oh.
Do you want?
Tempérament égal.
Do you want?
No, we're good. Yeah. No, we're okay. So I'm just gonna, we'll play those up. We don't have that? Oh, no, 3/8's up. It's smaller than a half, so it's okay. Yeah, 3/8 is like less.
Oh, because we're going in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah,
5/8 is 3/8.
It's opposite. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, yeah,
Il va y avoir des
that's
notes
okay.
qui vont être plus,
Faut que tu montes.
plus élevées et d'autres qui vont être
So we'll maybe play it out, sing it out,
des
and then
pièges
we'll just
qui vont
wrap it
être
up.
plus accentuées que d'autres.
Mais ça, c'est quand le piano est pas du tout.
Non, même pas. Quand c'est bien tempéré, au lieu d'être également tempéré.
It's, yeah.
Mais,
Quand il est également tempéré, en fait, tu dis qu'il se lève tôt.
Okay, so we just finished getting the all of the different fractions we just produced. So exactly, what are we talking about? So we just got the other fractions, the other divisions. Now you'll notice that they're not equal, but they do work together. If you guys want to maybe come a little closer to the monochord, for those who haven't seen it yet, really, it might be worth it. Have we lost any bodies? We lost that guy. Lost my mom.
yeah.
She'll be able soon. Okay.
It's okay.
All right. So that's, yeah, that should work. It's just this annoying paper that's getting in the way. It's hard to place down. Yeah, I wish we can't do that. The paper's just in the way. All right. Okay. So let's hear this thing out and then see if this is indeed pleasant to the ear or dissonant. This thing? What do you mean, like this? Oh, like that? Oh, I see.
No, but then you can't take this one.
Right, I could sort of do this. I could try to. Okay, so we're going to go from the half, from the highest to the octave, all the way up the scale. Keeping in mind, oh, whatever, we'll worry about that after. Okay.
You're stretching it a bit, though, no?
Amen. Okay, actually, let's just, yeah, I'm not gonna make the comparison right now. Oh shit, wrong way. Oops. Okay, so this is our octave. idea. Now it's. Oh, that's good. Yeah, this kind of worked okay though. Now, yeah, I guess so. Should I? Yeah, I should do both. All right.
They're in tune?
Yeah, see if they're in tune.
They're not.
I don't know. I think they're a little out of whack, but they might be okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. All right. So same arrangement. People on the left. Let's do the high notes. People on the right will do the low. Oh, that'll be boring for the people on the right. That's okay.
That's all right.
Okay.
So hold it steady.
JP, you gonna
Yeah, sure.
pop in? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. The Gregorian chanters. Good. All right, harmonic mean. Okay, arithmetic mean. This is, sorry, 4/5. Five sixths. Okay, sorry. No, it's really fucked up. Hold on. Okay. Now we're getting to one that Kepler states is the main dissonant sound, and we're going to see if that's actually true. 7/8.
Yeah, it's pretty distant.
Yeah, no. Now Kepler's reasoning for why that last one sounded kind of off was that what we're dealing with the heptagon is a shape that really can't be constructed by a circle, through a circle.
What's a heptagon?
Heptagon is a seven-sided shape, 7 equal sides.
Oh,
And
7/8.
7/8, yeah, because the only way to get that is that though it's the octagon, it partakes in this inconstructible figure that Kepler says is just completely impossible for humans to produce. I don't know that for sure, but that's the explanation of why it's dissonant. What we've noticed here is that we've got the octave, that's the eighth. The 3/5, that's a hard sixth. The 5/8, that's called the soft sixth. Here's the 2/3, which is also the diapente, or the fifth. The 3/4 is the diatessaron, or the fourth. 4/5 is the hard third. Then we've got 5/6, which is the soft third. And then we've got our 1, which is the string as a whole.
When you say hard and soft third, you mean major and minor third?
Yeah, I mean that you've got
Like what's now called
a
major
scale,
and minor?
like a hard scale and a soft scale. And perhaps that could be
Does
true.
quite call it like that?
Yeah, I
Like
think
there's-
today it might
No,
be
no, I'm saying
considered
what's
that way.
called now.
Yeah,
Nowadays.
yeah, I think
Now we would use
we
these
call that
terms,
Major
but
and
it's
minor.
not even
Yeah.
that. Like in the way that Kepler's, I mean, it's gonna change a little bit. Like the
Yeah.
piano is not gonna play it exactly the same.
Right.
Right. But that's the general
'Cause
idea.
That's Bach. That's
The
the whole-
A440.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
C256.
Suzuki.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew?
You know some-
How do they call the whole box here?
432.
Huh?
How do they call
A432 is
this,
what
the whole thing here?
This is a monochord.
Bach was A440,
monochord.
right? The Bach
Yeah.
reforms to make A440.
No. A440 comes with recorded music. A432 is, well, or C256 is what
What
The
LaRouche
well-
advocates.
what the well-tempered scale was
Yeah.
based upon.
I thought A440 came from Bach.
You'll notice that what we missed, though, what we don't have, are the second or actually the 7th here and the 2nd. You've got these gaps between these 2 notes and these 2 notes. So the method of thinking that we have employed so far to make the progress that we did in constructing this thing is going to break down at this point, and we're going to have to come up with a new geometry of thought in order to solve the problem of how do we find the 7th and the 2nd. We know that those numbers exist, so it's implied that we can discover it. Though we're out of time today, I figure what we can do is maybe make a plan in the upcoming weeks ahead to either work in this as groups or have follow-up classes where we can maybe continue to construct this thing. I was going to finish with a quote, also by Plato, from the end of the Republic. You guys want to stand up and listen? Yeah, that's good too. Yeah, stand up and listen. That's good.
I didn't do it.
Oh, sorry. Actually, because we didn't get any of Kepler's mind express itself except for what we're playing with. Yeah, shit, yeah. So let's read a quote from Kepler from the chapter that we're working from. Yeah, we're gonna read a quote by Kepler and then end with a quote by Plato. You guys monkey laughing at. Right. All right. JP, could you read? Can you see?
It is mind or the human intellect by the judgment or instinct of which the sense of hearing discriminates pleasant, that is, consonant proportions, from the unpleasant and dissonant, especially if he ponders carefully that proportions are entities of reason, perceptible by reason alone, not by senses, and that to distinguish proportions as form from that which is proportioned as matter is the work of mind.
At what point did we actually hear a harmony? Or what point did our sense perception?
Can you maybe read the quote one more time?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah.
It is mind or the human intellect by the judgment or instinct of which the sense of hearing discriminates pleasant, that is, consonant proportions, from the unpleasant and dissonant, especially if he ponders carefully that proportions are entities of reason, perceptible by reason alone, not by sense, and that to distinguish proportions as form from that which is proportioned as matter is the work of mind.
What's something that's proportioned as matter?
That's string.
The string.
Yeah, material proportion.
But the idea of proportion is something you can't see with yourself, or you can't see in reality. You can't.
Says here.
Yeah, like a proportion implies that you're comparing two things, right? So there's an act of comparison and judgment that's occurring behind the idea itself of proportion. It itself doesn't stand as a thing unto itself, right? So that what is it that we have within us? Do our eyes themselves judge, or do our ears judge? Right? So there's no individual sense that actually takes in a harmony. So what is it within us that judges something to be dissonant or harmonic or proportional, you know? Okay. All right. Now to finish as we began, this is the very last part of Book 10, the end of the Republic. I think it ends it pretty well. Petros.
There indeed, my dear Glaucon, is the whole danger for man. Therefore, we must take care, we must take most care that each one of us shall disregard all studies, except this one study. And in this he shall be both seeker and student, to see if he shall be able to learn and discover in any place one who shall give him the ability and the intelligence to know a good life from a bad, and to choose always and everywhere the best that the conditions allow, taking into account all that we have spoken of and comparing and distinguishing them for their effect towards virtue in life. One who shall teach him how thus to know what beauty mingled with poverty or riches in union with that state of soul will work good or evil. What will be the effect of high birth or low birth, private station or government station, strength or weakness, cleverness or dullness in learning, and all such qualities of the soul, natural or acquired, what effects they will have when commingled together, so that it will be possible. So that it will be possible. Excuse me, I've lost my.
Yeah, it's right. Okay.
So that it will be possible for him, by taking account of all these things, to make his choice, keeping his gaze fixed all the while on the nature of the soul, and considering both the worse if it so leads the soul that it becomes more unjust, and better if it leads the soul to become more just. All else he will leave alone, for we have seen that this is the best choice, both for living and for dying. Holding fast, then, to this faith like adamant, he must go to the house of Hades, that there also he may be unshaken by riches and such evil things, that he may not fall into tyrannies and other such activities, and do many incurable evils, and suffer greater evils himself, but that he may know how to choose always the life that lies in the mean of such things, and to flee from excess on either side, both in his life as far as possible, and in the lives to come. For thus does man become happiest and most fortunate.
Good.
You like when people clap for you.
Yeah.
1 second later, he would have been mad.
Can you just maybe shed some light as to what follows?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at this point, you mean the entire book, the entire discovery, or just in terms of what we didn't touch today? Yeah. Well, this entire book and what we didn't yet accomplish. Hold on. What we didn't yet finish accomplishing was fully constructing the octave. We didn't do that, nor did we figure out why exactly the hard scale is different from the soft, how the pentagon relates to governing the difference in what makes a hard scale and a soft scale. So we didn't do that yet. What Kepler does in the entire book, because it's set up in five books as Harmonies of the Worlds. The first two go through plane geometry, surface two-dimensional geometry, how everything we can know, how the mind comes to make discoveries in developing all action within two-dimensional space. In the second book, he looks more at solids, like we have back there, that big yellow thing by the globe, and how those relate to each other, how those are constructed, and what proportions of distances the 5 major platonic solids, because you can only from a sphere construct 5 solids. And he looks at, by inscribing spheres outside and inside of each solid, and then putting another solid inside and doing that continuously for all of them, what are the distances and what are the proportions that occur? Now, what we just looked at was book 3, where he brings back, he actually makes unique discoveries in harmonies that form the basis for what he applies in Book 5, which is astronomy. And he only gets it, it's kind of ironic that as an astronomer, he only gets it astronomy in the very last book after he does all this stuff here, setting the foundations. The discovery of gravity, and this is really, really important to really sink your teeth into, can only be known not by any Isaac Newton. No apple could fall on somebody's head. That's not why we know gravity. Okay, that's just really important to get through. You can't know without understanding first how the planets sing together and how there's every single orbit of every planet around the sun has a harmonic relationship to every other planet within the solar system. And Kepler does that. He successfully does that. That's where you get Kepler's third law from. You wouldn't get Kepler's third law if you couldn't discover that.
What's Kepler's third law?
That's the square of the distance from the planet to the sun is proportional to the cube of its mean time around the orbit. The book 4 is all on it's all in theology and the soul, because he's asking after he gets to these first 3 books. Now, what is it actually what is it actually that's judging? What is it actually that's coming to know the universe? And so it's a meaty theological endeavor to work through, but that is necessary to get into the astronomy work. So that's the foundation of what the curriculum has been. When I joined, I was lucky enough to, it was like the first week that people had started working on the new astronomy, which is where Kepler's first 2 laws come into being, and he overthrows 2,000 years of, Aristotelian ignorance. And he attacks Aristotle completely throughout the whole book. It's really fun. So you really see him situating his identity in what Plato is putting forth here for future scientists, leaders to accomplish in terms of setting up a functional harmonic system, like an idea where wisdom is the governing principle of a society. Is that kind of what you were looking for? Yeah. So yeah, we're doing this. Every as it stands, we do some pretty intense work every Friday and Sunday. Some of you guys have already been here for some of the classes, some of the work on Leibniz, who took up Kepler's challenge to discover how do you measure a constantly changing orbit that's different at every point, because on an ellipse, every single point that the planet exists in relation to the sun is always a different relationship, right? It's always getting further and closer from the sun. So it's easy to measure the distance of something that's always the same, like a circle. But for something that's always changing, you need to make the discovery. And Kepler didn't do it in his lifetime, but he did call out vocally for a mathematician to make that discovery that he knew was there to be made. And it was only when Leibniz came around a generation later that it was. Gauss, similarly, who we've been working through, also took on Kepler's challenge of discovering the exploded planet that Kepler couldn't even see. But based on the fact that he knows harmonies and he knows where the dissonant interval is within the chord, he knew there must be something there. And it was only 200 years later that you had Gauss, who discovered the orbit of Ceres. And so we're right now in the Leibnizian stage, but we're sort of moving around from Vernadsky onward. And any of you guys can join in at any point in time. It's pretty accessible, relatively. Not absolutely, but relatively. That's funny for us.